Hello, tankers. I'm your instructor. Today, we'll talk about shooting. Here they are, these beauties. The cannons, a tank's main feature, without which it'd only be an armored car at best. But a gun's caliber means nothing unless you know how to use it. Let's cover the most important terms and mechanics first. Accuracy. To improve your chances of hitting your target, stop and wait until the dispersion circle is as small as possible. Remember that a shell can go anywhere in the circle. Sometimes it can also fly beyond the circle's borders. This happens due to a lag between the game client and the server. For example, in your game client, you may have already turned to your target, but on the server, you're still turning. To minimize this delay, you can enable server reticle in the settings. It's not as smooth, but it shows the actual situation on the server. The aiming circle grows upon firing, on the move, and during hull and turret traverse. How big the aiming circle is when you're not fully aimed is called stabilization. To lock onto targets while you're on the move, use auto-aim. It's hard to hit a target you can't see. If a target is beyond your view range circle, you won't be able to spot it yourself. If it's beyond the draw circle, you won't see it even if your allies can. Different guns and shells have different armor penetration. Enable the penetration marker in the game settings. It's an invaluable tool for new players. The marker will show the most likely result of your shot. Remember that there's a range of plus minus 25% to damage and penetration. Two identical shots can give different results. Shell trajectory is calculated automatically by a ballistic calculator, so you don't need to raise your gun. But when your target is moving, it's best not to use auto-aim. Aim manually and consider the velocity of the shell you're using. It often depends on one of the 4 shell types. Armor-piercing shells usually have good velocity. They penetrate obstacles and screens well. However, they lose penetration value over distance and can bounce off armor when hitting it at acute angles. But they have the best normalization of all shell types. Normalization is the shell's ability to turn a few degrees toward a vehicle's armor when hitting it. This way, the impact angle becomes better and effective armor is reduced. APCR shells usually have the best velocity. They also penetrate obstacles and screens. Upon contact with armor, they also normalize, but to a smaller degree than AP shells. Their main disadvantages are that they lose a lot of penetration power over distance and ricochet at more acute angles. This means they're not the best choice for firing at well-sloped armor. This is where heat shells come in handy. They almost never ricochet and usually have good penetration. They don't lose penetration power at a distance, but they usually have worse velocity than APCR and AP shells. The drawbacks of heat shells are that they don't normalize and are worse at dealing with screens or obstacles. This is due to their explosive effect. High explosive shells cause devastating damage, but usually penetrate armor very poorly. They don't lose penetration power over distance. HE shells don't normalize, but they never bounce off either. They cause minor damage even without penetration. The damage caused depends on the effective armor at the impact point. You shouldn't rely on them though. It's better to penetrate the enemy's armor with another shell and save your HE shells for a thin target. Overall, AP shells are effective and versatile. APCR shells travel fast but often ricochet. Heat shells almost never ricochet but are ineffective against obstacles and screens. HE shells are the most niche use case and usually for targets with very thin armor. Different tanks can have completely different shell loadouts, but for all vehicles, the first shell is an affordable standard one. The second is a more expensive special round with improved characteristics. And the third is a high explosive shell. You can change their order for a particular vehicle in your garage. It's important to know the 3 caliber rule. It limits ricochets for thin armor. If a shell's caliber is 3 times higher than nominal armor at the impact point, it won't ricochet. Only effective armor will be calculated for any shell in this case. For example, when firing at the highly angled armor of the STR-V103B, the shell's caliber is more important than penetration. Now let's talk about how different guns are loaded. Cyclic guns are a simple and reliable option when shells are loaded one by one. Auto-loading refers to a batch of shells that are loaded together and fired off one by one. Vehicles with autoloaders are deadly with a full magazine, but vulnerable during reload. The auto-reloading mechanism is similar to autoloaders, but you can fire a few shells without resetting the entire magazine. The missing shells will reload automatically. Remember that shell auto-reloading is reset upon firing. Don't fire before the shell is loaded unless you have to. Improved auto-reloading partially solves this problem by accelerating preparation of the next shell if the loading process was reset by firing. The mechanics of double-barreled tanks are similar to auto-reloading, but both guns have the same loading time. You can also do this. In the next episodes, we'll talk about the differences between double-barreled tanks. Guns with deep rifling differ from others, as their APCR shells lose not only penetration, but also damage over distance. In the future, you'll see guns with an automatic firing mode and more. So, we've learned the basic mechanics. Now let's try some trap shooting. If the target is stationary, wait for full aiming. If it's moving, you'll need to lead your shot. If it's armored, pick a weak spot. At the front, that's usually the lower glacis plate, driver's hatch, commander's cupola, and so on. Sometimes it can even be the gun mantlet. When you're starting out, use the penetration indicator, but also try to learn and memorize the armor layout of various vehicles. In addition to aiming at weak spots, you can change your direction of attack. Even tough nuts are much easier to crack from the side or rear. And if you're much higher than your opponent, try to penetrate their roof. Remember that some vehicles don't have any serious armor. For example, light tanks are harder to land a hit on than to penetrate. It's useful to remember the layout of internal modules in enemy vehicles. Aiming at their fuel tanks, engine, and ammo rack will give you an advantage. Your chance of taking out an internal module depends on how much damage you cause it. You can find more information about module layout with the help of the World of Tanks community. External modules can also be disabled. Experienced tankers often immobilize enemy vehicles by shooting at their front or rear drive wheel or idler. Keep in mind that, after hitting an external module, shells keep on traveling and can penetrate the vehicle's main armor if they overlap. That's why shooting at a drive wheel doesn't do any damage from head-on, but can from the side. If the cost of the shot is high, it's better to knock off tracks with damage. In all other cases, destroy tracks even without causing damage. Immobilizing the enemy is very useful. Remember that tracks work as screens, also known as spaced armor. Some tanks are hard to stop due to their reserve track or wheels. When firing at a target, you often need to lower your gun to aim from behind terrain so you don't expose yourself. Different guns have very different gun depression angles. By using terrain correctly, you can minimize the lack of gun depression. There are also pneumatic suspension mechanics that help depress your gun. If the suspension is activated by pressing a button and not automatically, this is called siege mode. Besides gun depression, it also affects your mobility and many shooting parameters. In other words, a vehicle with siege mode can either roll fast or fire well. It looks like we're ready for battle. Or are we? Before we do, let's take a look at how you can improve your firing parameters in the garage. Crew perks. Intuition will allow the loader to change the type of loaded shell quickly. This way, you can quickly switch from a heat shell to AP to take out enemy tracks with damage, or to an HE shell to deal more damage to a target with little armor. Other perks can improve stabilization, shell velocity, and many other gun parameters. Try them all. Consumables. Food consumables will boost all characteristics that your crew affects. A little better loading speed, stabilization, aiming time, and so on. Equipment. Gun rammer improves gun loading speed. Experienced tankers value it highly, but it can't be mounted on tanks with auto-loading mechanisms of any type. Vertical stabilizer makes the aiming circle smaller on the move. It's useful, but it can't be equipped on many low-tier vehicles or any tank destroyers. Enhanced gun laying drive is useful for tank destroyers that can't use the stabilizer. Improved aiming makes the dispersion circle slightly smaller, both on the move and when fully aimed. It's useful for certain tank destroyers and snipers shooting from a distance. Improved ventilation improves everything a little. It's like a food consumable, but with a smaller effect. Field modification will let you further improve shooting parameters and unlock a special second equipment slot. It's better to put equipment of the respective specialization there. Experimental equipment combines bonuses from different pieces of equipment. For example, stabilizer and gun laying drive. So, we know how to shoot and what to shoot with. We're loaded and ready for battle. But if there are multiple targets in battle, who do you shoot first? This is called focus fire. Check their hit points. Most of the time, it's best to remove a tank with low HP from the fight. If you have a high caliber, sometimes it's better to cause more damage, but only if you're sure that the one-shot enemy won't run away and become a nuisance for you or your team. If you're playing in a platoon or just attacking together with your allies, you should focus your fire on one target. You also need to pick the fastest, most vulnerable, and most dangerous targets. For example, between a heavy tank and an ambush tank destroyer, it's better to choose the latter. It's easier to destroy, and this way, you'll eliminate its dangerous gun from battle. Tankers often choose reliable damage, closer targets with exposed sides, and so on. It's always better to cause damage than not to. But if you see a full HP heavy right in front of you, and a light tank with HP for one shot running away a little further off, weigh up your chances of hitting the priority target. Also, when picking a target, see who you can immobilize by taking out their tracks. Let's say you're fighting well on the front line, when suddenly you hear the siren wailing and see the base capture bar. How can you reset the capture? You need to cause damage to the enemy vehicle or damage any of its modules. This means destroying a track or damaging the gun will also reset the bar. And now, the most important thing needed for effective fire: your position. Even if you've prepared your tank, skillfully aim at weak spots, masterfully lead your targets, you're useless if you're not in the right position. Watch what other players do in your battles. Watch some streamers with good statistics. Memorize the best positions and don't be afraid to experiment. Remember that technically, the closer you are to the enemy, the more effective your fire will be. Get close, but not too close. Try to have cover and allies nearby, as well as a way to retreat. Monitor how the battle unfolds to attack or run away in time. A good position on the map is sometimes even more important than knowledge of weak spots and shooting mechanics. That's it for today. Show this video to your friends who are still hugging the red line and firing HE shells at the upper glacis. In the next episode, we'll talk about armor and damage blocking. See you soon.